It all started with a phone call. Emily hadn't answered in days, and even though I knew she was visiting her grandmother on a remote farm, something inside me screamed that something was wrong. The drive to the farm was a mix of anxiety and mental preparation. It was a cold night, with thick fog covering the roads. Each turn seemed to pull me deeper into an unknown I wasn't sure I wanted to face. When I parked the car, the silence was deafening. The farm was shrouded in darkness with only the faint light from the porch illuminating a small portion of the property. The wind gently swayed the wooden door, as if inviting me in. I knocked a few times, hearing the echo resonate through what felt like an empty void. Then I heard footsteps inside. Emily's grandmother opened the door. She was pale, with sunken eyes, but she smiled when she saw me, as if my presence was something she had been expecting. "Peter, I'm glad you came. Emily went to town 3 days ago and hasn't returned. I thought she was with you." My heart sank. Something didn't add up. Emily would never leave without letting me know. I stepped inside and was greeted by the smell of old wood and something sweet, almost nauseating. Everything seemed frozen in time. Old photographs framed the walls, and a pendulum clock marked the hours with a slow tick-tock. Emily's grandmother offered me tea, but I declined, eager to get more answers. That's when I noticed something on the living room table. A letter. The handwriting was messy, almost scribbled. The words were a jumble of incomprehensible symbols. In the bottom corner there was a grotesque drawing. A tall, thin man without a face, with tentacles sprouting from his back. A shiver ran down my spine. "Who made this?" I asked. The grandmother looked at the letter, and her expression hardened. Emily found it in the barn 2 days before she left. Since then, she had been different, distracted, like something was bothering her. My mind was racing. I decided to investigate the barn. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way across the property to the aging structure. Each step seemed to echo in the emptiness of the night. When I opened the doors, I was hit by a wave of mold and cold air. I searched the place, looking for anything that might make sense, and in one corner, I found a small makeshift altar. Melted candles surrounded a torn photo of Emily and another letter with the same cryptic symbols. As I examined the altar, I heard footsteps outside. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing. Only the wind and the rustling of trees in the distance. I decided to head back to the house, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. With each step, my heart raced, as if something was about to leap out of the shadows. Back in the living room, I tried calling Emily again, but there was no signal. I showed the second letter to her grandmother, who seemed even more nervous. "This isn't good, Peter. This belongs to the legends around here. They say it's best not to meddle with this." When I asked what she meant, she avoided my eyes and murmured something about a keeper of the farm. I spent the night in the house. Even though I was exhausted, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound jolted me awake. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something coming from downstairs. Grabbing the flashlight, I descended as quietly as possible. When I reached the living room, the front door was open, swaying slightly in the wind. Outside, in the fog, something was moving. It was a tall, impossibly thin figure, standing at the edge of the field. The flashlight flickered for a moment, and when it came back on, the figure was gone. My body trembled, and my mind refused to process what I had just seen. I shut and locked the door, but deep down, I knew the night still held more secrets than I could bear. The letter, the symbols, and the drawing of the faceless man were all connected somehow. And deep down, I knew Emily was in danger. As the dawn broke, my determination to find her only grew stronger. Little did I know, I was about to uncover something that would change my life forever. The dawn brought a false sense of security. Daylight should have driven the fear away, but instead, it only revealed how desolate the farm truly was. Everything seemed coated with a fine layer of dust, as if life here had been paused. While the grandmother prepared something in the kitchen, I decided to explore the property further. Something told me the answers were hidden there, waiting to be found. I started with the field, where the soil looked strangely disturbed. I walked among the furrows, smelling damp earth and something else, something acrid. In one corner, I spotted a footprint. It was far too large to be human, but it didn't look like any common animal either. As I crouched to examine it more closely, I heard a crack coming from the surrounding woods. I looked up quickly but saw nothing. Just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The barn continued to pull at me. Something about that place seemed alive, as if it were the epicenter of all the strangeness. I stepped inside again, this time noticing details I had missed before. The wooden beams were marked with the same symbols as the letters, and some of the candles still had remnants of fresh wax. In the center, a small cracked mirror reflected my image in a distorted way. It felt as though the barn had been used for something not meant to be understood. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound, like wood breaking. I ran out of the barn, heart pounding, but there was nothing, only the wind. When I returned to the house, the grandmother was sitting at the table, staring intently at something in her hands. It was another piece of paper, once again covered in the scribbled symbols. "You need to leave, Peter. This isn't something you can fix," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I ignored her warning. I couldn't leave without Emily. I decided to spend more time in the house, searching the rooms. In Emily's old bedroom, I found a notebook. The last pages were filled with disturbing drawings, eyes that seemed to watch, elongated figures, and words repeated like a mantra. "He is here. He has always been here." Night fell quickly, bringing the fog back with it. The grandmother grew even more silent, and something about her behavior unsettled me. Around 10 o'clock, I realized she was no longer in the house. I called out for her, but there was no response. The front door was ajar, swaying gently. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The fog made it hard to see, but my steps instinctively led me back to the barn. When I opened the door, a wave of intense cold washed over me. In the center, the grandmother was kneeling, surrounded by lit candles. Her eyes were fixed on the cracked mirror, now positioned in front of her. A disturbing expression of calm marked her face. As I got closer, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. The candles formed a pattern resembling the same symbols from the letters. In the mirror, her reflection seemed different, as if she was staring at something behind me. Before I could speak, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging the barn into darkness. When the light returned, she was no longer breathing. The pattern on the floor seemed to faintly pulse, as if alive. I ran, heart pounding, without looking back. Deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. With my mind racing and heart heavy, I decided to drive to the nearest town. I needed help, someone who could handle this situation. But when I reached the small village, I sensed something was off. The few people in the streets avoided my gaze, whispering among themselves. When I finally stopped at the police station, the officer who attended to me seemed uneasy as soon as I mentioned the farm. "That farm. Nobody goes there. We can't help you. I'm sorry, son, but you'd best leave," he said, without even taking down the details. I was stunned. But Emily's grandmother, she needs help. Someone died there. He shook his head slowly. "We can't do anything. That place is cursed. It always has been." Out of options, I tried the local hospital. When I mentioned the farm's address, the receptionist refused to send an ambulance. "It's not safe. Not for us," was all she said before turning away and leaving me alone in the lobby. Back at the farm, the emptiness felt even more oppressive. If no one was going to help, I resolved to uncover the truth myself. I began searching every corner of the house, determined to find something that would explain everything. After hours of looking, I discovered a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the study. It led to a basement. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. The air was heavy and damp, carrying the smell of old paper. I shone my flashlight around, revealing shelves filled with old newspapers and stacked boxes. Each newspaper seemed to tell a grim story about the farm. Disappearances, sightings of a faceless figure, and accounts of inexplicable events. At the back of the basement, I found something more recent. A leather journal marked with the name of Emily's grandfather. As I opened it, a chill ran through me. The first pages were ordinary notes, but as I read further, the writing grew more erratic. He wrote about disturbing dreams, the feeling of being watched, and a guardian, protecting something buried in the farm's soil. I closed the journal with trembling hands. Something horrific had happened here, something that might still be happening, and for the first time I wondered if I would make it out alive. The night seemed endless. The weight of what I'd discovered in the basement pressed heavily on my chest. Emily's grandfather's journal was now the only link between me and the truth about what was happening on the farm. With the flashlight trembling in my hand, I sat at the living room table and reopened the journal. The first pages were routine, records about crops, livestock, and daily chores. But soon, the tone of the entries began to shift. The words became frantic, almost delirious. One particular entry caught my attention. October 5th, 1916. They came. They bring chaos, but claim to be our salvation. I do not trust them. Who were they? I kept reading, gripping the pages tighter with each word. October 12th, 1916. Emily doesn't sleep anymore. She talks about the tall man, but no one else sees him. She says he lives among the trees and watches. I don't know how much longer we can endure. The words froze me. It couldn't be a coincidence that the name Emily appeared, even if it was another person with the same name, perhaps an ancestor. The connection was undeniable, and the tall man. I remembered the figure I had seen in the fog. This was no ordinary farm. Something far older and darker had taken root here, entwining itself with the generations of the family. And now, it had me in its grasp. As more entries in the journal unfolded, they painted a chilling picture of a group of people who arrived at the farm shortly after a devastating fire. The description of the blaze was vivid. October 19th, 1916. The farm burned. The fire was swift, voracious, and took everyone with it. They say it was an accident, but I saw it. I saw the flames dance as if commanded by something alive. This mention triggered a spark of rationality. I remembered the old newspapers in the basement. Ignoring the threatening creak of the stairs, I hurried back down and rummaged through the archives, pulling out several yellowed editions. At last, I found what I was looking for. A large headline dated 1916. Tragedy at Holloway Farm. Mysterious fire devastates property. Entire family perishes. The words leapt off the page. I read the article carefully. The fire had claimed the lives of every member of the Holloway family, parents, children, and even the farmhands. No survivors. The cause was never determined, but the piece mentioned local rumors. Some whispered of witchcraft, others of divine punishment. However, one detail stood out. 2 weeks after the tragedy, a group of strangers settled on the farm. They came from a nearby town and took over the property. Their purpose remains a mystery. The connection to the group mentioned in the journal was unmistakable. They had come to claim a place steeped in death. But why? I returned to the journal, devouring every page for more clues. The final entries were even more harrowing. Emily's grandfather described hearing whispers from the barn, seeing shadows moving at night, and feeling a constant presence watching him. The last entry was nearly illegible, as if written in haste or despair. They said he protects what was buried, that it will never be found by us, but he always watches. He has always been here. Finishing the journal left my head spinning. Who was he? And what was buried on the farm that warranted such tragedy and mystery? The answers seemed to lie hidden in the soil, intertwined with the past and the present. I thought of the footprints I had seen in the field and the strange markings in the barn. Everything pointed to something buried there, something that should perhaps never be unearthed. But how could I ignore it now? Emily was missing, and I couldn't shake the thought that her disappearance was tied directly to all of this. The journal, the symbols, the tall man. Everything was connected, waiting for me to put the pieces together. At dawn, wrapped in dense fog, I was already awake, clutching the journal. I hadn't slept after reading those words, which echoed in my mind, blending with the sound of the wind cutting through the fields. It was time to seek answers, no matter how much fear clung to me like a shadow. But first, I had to face a task I had been avoiding. Emily's grandmother's body was wrapped in a sheet in the guest room. The nearby town, with its suspicious and superstitious inhabitants, had refused to help. That left me with no choice but to bury her on the farm itself. With a shovel in hand, I made my way to the back of the property, where the soil seemed less dense. Each step grew heavier, not just from physical exhaustion but from the psychological weight of what I was about to do. I chose an isolated spot, far enough from the house, and began digging. The sound of metal striking dry earth was accompanied by an unsettling silence that hung in the morning air. As I worked, my mind kept circling back to the journal's words. He always watches. He has always been here. The more I dug, the more I felt the sensation of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. The soil beneath my feet seemed to resist my efforts, as though it were guarding its secrets. Each shovelful of dirt brought me closer to the truth, or perhaps something I would regret uncovering. After about an hour of digging, the hole was finally deep enough, but as I raised the shovel to smooth the bottom, it struck something hard. Frowning, I knelt down and brushed away the dirt with my hands. That's when I saw it. A coffin. And not just one, several neatly arranged side by side, buried in organized rows. Fear hit me like a punch to the gut. What kind of place was this, and who were the people buried here? I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me. My heart was racing, and the urge to drop everything and run nearly overwhelmed me. In that moment, the idea of abandoning the farm, and Emily, seemed temptingly safe. I could go back to the town, alert the authorities, and never look back. But then something inside me pushed back. I thought of Emily, her smile, her determination to face her own fears. If I left her now, I'd never forgive myself. Taking a deep breath, I summoned my courage and decided to continue. I covered the coffins again, mentally marking the spot for later investigation. I buried Emily's grandmother in a separate area, offering a brief prayer before stepping away. With the shovel still in my hands, I returned to the barn. That place had been mentioned repeatedly in the journal, and I needed to find out what was there. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing the dark, dusty interior. Rays of light filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting beams onto the dirt floor. I began searching every corner, moving boxes, tools, and bales of hay. At the back of the barn, I found something out of place. A wooden panel embedded in the ground with rusty hinges. Kneeling down, I pried it open with effort, revealing a trapdoor that led down to a dark chamber. The smell of mold and earth hit me instantly. I shone my flashlight inside, revealing steps that descended into a space beneath the barn. My instincts screamed at me not to go down, but curiosity and the need for answers urged me forward. I descended cautiously, the wood creaking under my weight. The space was small, with stone walls and a dirt floor etched with symbols. At the center, there was an improvised table, surrounded by extinguished candles and small ritualistic objects. My heart raced as I took it all in. Was this what Emily's grandfather had described in the journal? Some kind of cult? As I explored the area, I found another notebook hidden in a drawer beneath the table. Its pages were filled with notes and symbols I couldn't decipher, but one word stood out, repeated over and over. Vigia, the Watcher. Who or what was this Watcher? I closed the notebook and climbed back up to the barn, feeling the oppressive claustrophobia linger. The daylight was brighter now, but the sensation of being watched hadn't left. I walked back to the house, fighting the growing urge to drop everything and flee. I knew the answer to Emily's disappearance was hidden in these clues, but the deeper I dug, the more I felt I was stirring something that should have stayed buried. Inside the house, I laid the two notebooks side by side. It was time to cross-reference the information and try to piece together the puzzle. My fear was still there, but my determination to find Emily burned brighter. Even if it meant confronting the unexplainable, I had to keep going. I opened my laptop and connected it to the internet. If there was something happening on this farm, I needed to know. Using details from the journals, I searched for local legends and stories. The eerie silence of the house was broken only by the sound of keys clicking as I typed keywords. Farm fire 1916. Entity Maltrapilho. Local legends. The answers began to emerge. Old accounts spoke of a dark figure known as Maltrapilho. Described as a pale, hunched entity draped in filthy rags, it was said to roam the area every 77 months, seeking the virgin girl of the farm. This figure was feared by everyone in the region, and even now locals avoided speaking its name aloud. The details chilled me. Maltrapilho wasn't just a story, it was woven into the very fabric of this place. The connection to the fire, the coffins, the symbols, and Emily's disappearance was undeniable. All signs pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Emily might have been taken as part of a ritual linked to this ancient legend. The weight of it all settled on my chest like a lead blanket. I stared at the notebooks and the dim glow of the laptop screen, the wind howling faintly outside. Whatever the truth was, it wasn't just history, it was alive, and it had set its sights on this farm. And on me. The old article, digitized by a local newspaper, recounted the chilling events of 1916. That year, Arthur Winthorpe, the farm's owner, handed over the daughter of his maid to Maltrapilho, believing it would protect his own family. However, the girl didn't meet the entity's requirements, whatever they were. Enraged, Maltrapilho retaliated by taking Arthur's own daughter, Eleanor. What followed was described as a series of inexplicable events. Consumed by grief and guilt, Arthur reportedly attempted to confront Maltrapilho. The details of how he did so were vague, but the consequences were undeniable. A fire engulfed the main house, killing Arthur, his wife, and all remaining servants. Only the barn and some surrounding land were left untouched. I kept reading, searching for more details about Maltrapilho. Rumors suggested that the entity could only be stopped through a pact, though no one seemed to know exactly what this entailed. Most unsettling was the cycle of the entity's return. If the 77-month interval was correct, Maltrapilho would have recently returned, or perhaps it was still here. My hands trembled as I leafed through Arthur's journal again, trying to match the dates. His notes detailed his growing obsession with defeating Maltrapillo, but the entries ended abruptly, as though he hadn't had the chance to finish his thoughts before the fire claimed everything. With my heart pounding, I decided to step outside and clear my head. Grabbing the flashlight, I walked toward the barn, where the sensation of being watched felt even stronger. Whatever was happening here wasn't just the product of old legends or long-dead ghosts. I could feel it in the air, in the way the farm seemed to pulse with dark energy. Yet, despite my growing fear, something compelled me to continue. Emily was still missing, and the answers felt agonizingly close, even if uncovering them came at a price I couldn't yet foresee. Sitting on the porch of the house, I gazed at the forest surrounding the farm. A natural wall of towering trees and infinite shadows, it seemed to taunt me, guarding secrets I didn't have the courage to uncover. Why hadn't I gone after Emily yet? The thought gnawed at me. Part of me already knew the answer. Fear. Fear of failing her. Fear of what I might find, or worse, what I might not find. I had never been brave. I always admired Emily's strength, her determination, her unwavering willingness to face the unknown. And now, when she needed me the most, I hesitated. What did that say about me? The wind howled, rattling the trees as if mocking my indecision. "Enough," I muttered, standing up. I grabbed the flashlight, a kitchen knife, the closest thing to a weapon I could find, and Arthur Winthorpe's journal, now feeling like a cursed compass guiding me straight into hell. I walked to the edge of the forest, where daylight was swallowed by the shadows beneath the trees. Each crunch of twigs and leaves underfoot seemed deafening. Every step forward felt heavier, a silent battle between curiosity and dread. After some time, I began to notice disturbed patches of ground, overturned leaves, broken branches, marks in the dirt. Someone had been through here recently, possibly running. My curiosity propelled me onward until my eyes caught something lying on the ground. A notebook. I knelt and picked it up, instantly recognizing Emily's handwriting. Holding Emily's notebook in my trembling hands, I felt a surge of mixed emotions. Relief and despair, hope and fear. She was alive, or at least had been not long ago. Her hurriedly scrawled words were a fragile thread of hope in the chaos surrounding me, but the signs of a struggle nearby painted a darker picture. Flipping through the notebook, I found fragments of her thoughts, written in panic. "He's close. I can feel him watching me." The symbols. They keep appearing. I think they're meant to trap him or warn others. I don't know which. The barn feels alive. It's not just a place, it's part of him. Her final entry was smeared, as if her hand had trembled or she'd been interrupted. "I'm going to the clearing. It's the only place left to hide. If anyone finds this, please." The message ended abruptly. My stomach dropped as I looked up, scanning the forest. A clearing. Somewhere deeper in these oppressive woods. Emily was close. She had to be. And now, I knew where I had to go. Clutching the notebook tightly, I pressed forward into the darkness, where the forest seemed to whisper with unseen voices and the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. "Emily," I whispered, staring into the darkness of the forest around me. The wind seemed to answer with a distant moan, rustling the treetops and scattering leaves around the traces of a struggle. The broken branches and marks in the dirt hinted at a chase or a fierce confrontation. There was no blood, but no clear clue as to where she might have gone. I placed the flashlight on top of the notebook to illuminate the pages as I read Emily's notes more closely about the sealing ritual. She had deciphered something important, and I needed to understand it if I had any hope of saving her. The notes explained that the ritual had to be performed in a specific location, a stone circle deep in the forest, referred to as the shadow marker. The words were vague, but a rudimentary description mentioned stones arranged in a peculiar pattern, aligned with the western winds. There was also a list of items needed for the ritual. 1. A personal object belonging to the victim chosen by Maltrapillo, something they had been in close contact with. 2. Coarse salt and ashes from burned wood, symbols of purity and protection. 3. A symbol drawn with blood on a central stone, an offering of courage required to seal the entity. 4.3 Lit candles at sunset, representing the 3 cycles of the moon. 5. A specific chant, written in an almost illegible dialect. My mind rebelled at the thought of what this all meant. Blood? Personal objects? I was just an ordinary man, not someone equipped to deal with supernatural forces. The idea of carrying out something so specific and bizarre filled me with doubt. But the determination to save Emily grew stronger within me. She had written this to guide me. She believed in me. Clutching the notebook, I started searching for any sign of the shadow marker mentioned in the notes. Maybe there was a hidden clue along the forest's edge or a path I hadn't yet explored. Night was falling quickly, and I knew time was against me. As I walked among the trees, I followed faint traces of disordered footprints, interspersed with what looked like scratch marks on the ground. It was as if someone had been dragged or fought desperately to escape. My heart raced with each new sign, but the fear of encountering something worse paralyzed me for a few seconds before I pressed on. In the distance, the sound of breaking branches caught my attention. I froze, gripping the notebook tighter, straining to hear. Silence returned quickly, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Swallowing hard, I adjusted the flashlight and continued. After nearly an hour wandering the forest, I came upon a clearing. At its center was a circle of stones, just as described in the notebook. The stones were covered in moss, as though untouched for decades. A gust of wind swept through the clearing as I entered, and I felt as if I were trespassing on forbidden ground. I placed the notebook on one of the stones and reread the instructions. I needed to gather the items quickly. The sun was nearly set, and the candles had to be lit before nightfall took over completely. My first thought was to return to the house to retrieve whatever I could find. But before I could take a step, something behind me made a loud noise. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but all I saw were the shifting shadows of the trees. "Emily?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. The clearing seemed darker, as though something unseen was closing in. I knew I didn't have much time. Taking a deep breath, I turned back toward the trail leading to the farmhouse. I needed to prepare, or Emily wouldn't stand a chance, and neither would I. As I returned to the house, the rain came down in torrents. The once gray sky now roared with thunder that shook the ground beneath my feet. Raindrops pelted the roof like hammers, and the wind drove sheets of water against the windows with almost violent force. I sprinted onto the porch, soaked within seconds, and shoved the door open to get inside. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, something strange happened. A clicking sound echoed through the house, as if every lock had engaged at once. No, not now. I pushed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Running to the nearest window, I tried to pry it open, but it too was sealed tight. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I raced to the back door and the upstairs windows. Nothing. It was as though the house itself had decided to trap me inside. My heart pounded as my eyes darted around the dimming rooms. Darkness was falling fast, made worse by the black clouds of the storm. I grabbed the flashlight and began scanning the corners of the house, half expecting to find something, or someone, watching me. And then I heard it. A deep, repetitive sound. The thud of metal against dirt and stone. Paralyzed, I strained to pinpoint its origin. It was coming from the back of the property, the same area where I had uncovered the coffins. I ran to the living room window and tried to peer outside, but the heavy rain and fogged glass made it impossible to see anything clearly. The sound continued, rhythmic and unmistakable, shovels digging into the ground. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and for a split second I saw something. From a distance, a faint glimmer reflected in the light. Eyes. Not human, but something bright and piercing, locked on the house. My breath caught and I nearly dropped the flashlight. It can't be. Backing away from the window, panic surged through me. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone. The screen, slick with sweat and rain, slipped in my fingers as I dialed the police. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. "Please pick up," I whispered hoarsely. The call disconnected. I tried again and again. Each time the silence mocked me. A deafening clap of thunder shook the house and the lights flickered before going out completely. Now, I was alone in the dark, armed with nothing but the flashlight and the relentless sound of digging outside. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A text message. The screen lit up, revealing a name that made my heart stop. Emily. With wide eyes, I opened the message. "Peter, please. I'm in danger. Find help and come save me. Hurry." But something was wrong. In the corner of the message, the timestamp read 7 days ago. I froze, reading and rereading the words. How was this possible? Why was the message only arriving now? My finger hovered over the reply button, but the sound of the shovels grew louder, more insistent. "What's happening?" I whispered, my voice trembling under the weight of dread. The phone vibrated again. Another message. "You don't have much time. Come now." This time, the sender wasn't Emily. It simply read, "Unknown." I looked at the door, the windows, and then the notebook on the table. The pages were still open to the ritual's instructions. Everything felt connected in a horrifying way, but my mind was too overwhelmed to piece it all together. The rain pounded against the house as the sound of digging persisted. And those eyes, they were still there. Closer now. I had to decide. Run into the storm to face whatever was out there, or stay inside and confront whatever had locked me in. Both choices felt like a gamble with death. But Emily's notebook, the messages, and the ominous presence outside left me with no doubt. There was no turning back. One way or another, this night would end in truth, or in something far worse. The air inside the house grew heavier with every passing minute. The smell of damp wood mixed with something sharper, mold or perhaps decay, filled my nostrils. I clutched the flashlight so tightly my fingers ached. The digging sounds from outside had stopped, but the silence that replaced them was even worse. It was suffocating, oppressive, as if the quiet carried a weight of its own. Each shadow cast by the flashlight felt alive, like unseen eyes were watching from the corners of the house. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in around me. "It's all in my head," I muttered, trying to convince myself. Then, without warning, a creak echoed from above. My eyes snapped upward, another creak and another. Heavy footsteps crossing the floor above me. They stopped directly overhead. I froze, holding my breath as the flashlight trembled in my hand. Silence returned, but the fear didn't leave. I decided to move, hoping to find something, anything, that could help me escape. I passed through the kitchen, the dining room, the halls. Each step echoed like a shout in the emptiness. When I reached the main corridor, a growing warmth stopped me in my tracks. I turned around and saw an orange glow flickering from the living room. Fire. Flames began to lick at the walls, appearing as if from nowhere, like some invisible wick had been lit. The heat grew unbearable, and smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I sprinted to the front door, kicking at it with all my strength, but it remained locked. The nearby window wouldn't budge either. "Not now, not now," I shouted, coughing as the air thickened with smoke. Running through the burning house, I couldn't shake the memory of Emily's notebook. The fire. It was like the blaze of 1916. It felt as though the house was punishing me, enacting its revenge for reasons I couldn't understand. Finally, I spotted a window in the kitchen that seemed unlocked. Grabbing a chair, I hurled it at the glass. The shattering sound was followed by a rush of fresh air, offering a fleeting moment of relief. Without hesitation, I climbed through the opening, scraping my arms and legs on the jagged remnants of glass. I tumbled into the muddy ground outside, coughing and gasping for air. When I turned around, the house was fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the night like a funeral pyre. The sight was haunting, a vivid reminder of the fire from 1916 that I had read about. For a brief moment, I considered running, abandoning everything, leaving Emily, the rituals, and this nightmare behind. But I knew that wasn't an option. I had to finish what I'd started. My thoughts turned to the notebook, to the instructions for the ritual. My gaze shifted toward the area where the coffins were buried, but the memory of those glowing eyes still haunted me. I can't go back there, I muttered, trying to convince myself that wasn't the right path. Then I remembered the stone circle, the shadow marker, the place mentioned in the notebook. If the sealing ritual was my only chance to end this nightmare, I had to try. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself against the terror that gripped me like chains around my ankles, and I started walking toward the circle of stones. The rain continued to fall, its rhythm blending with another sound, faint and eerie, something I couldn't dismiss as mere wind. With the flashlight in one hand and Emily's notebook in the other, I stepped into the night knowing the worst was yet to come. The crackle of dry branches underfoot was the only sound breaking the silence of the forest. The air was thick with the sharp scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Though I was alone, the oppressive sensation of being watched never left me. It was almost tangible, a heavy presence that made me glance over my shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. As I moved deeper into the woods, the path seemed to twist unnaturally, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. The clearing wasn't far now, but with every step, the oppressive weight in the air grew heavier, and the whispers of the forest became louder, as if warning me to turn back. Yet I pressed on, knowing there was no other choice. I clutched the silver amulet I had found in my grandmother's attic, now hanging from a chain around my neck. The object seemed to vibrate faintly, as if reacting to the energy around me. I knew I was drawing closer to the site of the sealing, the heart of the curse that had haunted my family for generations. Walking along the nearly vanished trail, a sudden vision stopped me in my tracks. Ahead, the forest dissolved, replaced by a scene that seemed plucked from another time. I saw a family arriving at the farm, their faces heavy with a mix of hope and dread. Among them was a young woman with golden hair and piercing blue eyes. For a moment, I thought it was my Emily, but I quickly realized she had a different aura, as though she belonged to another century. "Emily," I murmured, a shiver running up my spine. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind an unsettling certainty. The family that had occupied the farm after the tragedy of the first wasn't unfamiliar to me. Descendants of travelers from another town, they had been lured by promises of fertile land, but instead found echoes of an ancient horror. The young Emily, whose resemblance to my girlfriend was uncanny, had been the first to sense something was wrong. I realized then this Emily was a distant ancestor of my girlfriend. Her family had left fragmented records, letters, diaries, whispered legends that mentioned the curse and a shadowy watcher that haunted the property. This connection had somehow bound my Emily and me to the farm's dark history in the present day. As I tried to process this revelation, another vision overtook me. This time, I saw the guardian, a figure shrouded in flickering light, standing amidst the trees. It gestured toward an alternate path but said nothing. The amulet around my neck vibrated more strongly, and I realized the entity was trying to guide me. But why? The silence was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps. The watcher was near. Without hesitation, I followed the path indicated by the guardian, plunging deeper into the forest, where even the faintest traces of daylight struggled to penetrate. The trees grew increasingly twisted, their gnarled branches seeming to reach out to bar my way. I didn't know how much time had passed when I finally emerged into a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone, rising like an altar, covered in inscriptions that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. This was the site of the ceiling. Before I could take another step, the air around me turned icy. The watcher emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing like burning coals. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. As the dark presence advanced, I gripped the amulet tightly and recalled the visions. The guardian hadn't led me here by chance. There was something I hadn't yet fully understood, something crucial to breaking the curse once and for all. I reached the stone altar, exhausted but resolute. The imposing structure, adorned with ancient carvings, radiated a strange and oppressive energy. I pulled out the notebook with the instructions I'd found in the attic and began reading through them again. Despair crept in as I realized just how unprepared I was. Most of the necessary items for the ritual weren't with me. A consecrated black candle, a blade bathed in salt, and ashes from something once sacred, I murmured, scanning the list once more. My eyes fell on the amulet around my neck, but I knew it alone wouldn't be enough. A dark thought crossed my mind. The coffins on the farm. Perhaps, just perhaps, they contained the items I needed. Reluctantly, I decided I had no other choice. The energy surrounding the stones seemed to repel me, as if it knew I wasn't ready. Turning my back on the altar, I started the long walk back through the forest. The path felt even more oppressive on the return journey. The twisted branches seemed to shift as I passed, the shadows growing deeper, more sinister. The sense of being watched was stronger than ever. My breath quickened as I approached the edge of the forest, the faint outline of the farm looming in the distance. The coffins awaited, and with them, the secrets buried alongside the curse. There it was, standing in the distance among the trees, a tall and skeletal figure loomed. My breath caught in my throat. Maltrapillo. It had no face, only a dark void where features should have been. Its clothes were tattered, blackened rags hanging from a body that seemed on the verge of collapse, but moved with an eerie, supernatural strength. A hoarse, echoing voice filled the forest, as if coming from everywhere at once. "Leave the farm, while you still can." My body froze. Fear dug its claws into me so deeply that, for a moment, I thought I couldn't move. Just seeing it felt like my energy was being drained, as though it was stealing a part of me. With immense effort, I managed to take a step back, then another, and another. Running felt like the only sensible option, but I knew I couldn't. My family, my girlfriend, and the generations before us depended on me. There was no other way, even if it meant facing the terror head-on. With my heart pounding erratically and my hands trembling, I forced myself to press on toward the farm, fully aware that Maltrapillo could be watching my every step. Walking through the forest with hesitant steps, I felt the weight of every shadow, every whisper of movement among the trees. The memory of Maltrapillo loomed in my mind, an unbearable presence. I knew the ritual was my only hope, but one question gnawed at me. The history of the family that moved onto the farm after the fire of 1916. When I finally reached the clearing around the farm, something new caught my attention. In the pale moonlight, The sight of the barn revealed something strange. Markings carved into the weathered wood. Approaching, I realized they were names and dates, like a record of generations. Some names were familiar, ones I had seen in Emily's notebook, but others were completely unknown. "Who are these people?" I murmured, running my fingers over the engravings. My thoughts drifted back to the vision of the young Emily and her family. There was something about them, something that seemed to repeat itself. A pattern. The dates etched into the wood matched the times of the disappearances mentioned in the old newspapers I'd found. Determined to uncover more, I entered the now partially ruined house. I searched through the cabinets on the ground floor, sifting through layers of dust and forgotten belongings. At the bottom of a drawer, I found a locked wooden box. Using a rusty knife, I pried it open to reveal its contents, an old farm ledger. The yellowed pages documented the history of every family that had lived on the property. One family in particular stood out, the Holloways. According to the notes, they were the first to take over the farm after the Great Fire. As I read, I realized the Holloways weren't just farmers. They had been drawn to the property by a mysterious man who promised to purify the past. This man, referred to only as the counselor, claimed the land had been tainted by a broken pact and that to prosper, the farm needed a keeper. The following pages grew increasingly erratic, with the descriptions of rituals, nocturnal gatherings, and the arrival of a hooded figure who never spoke but always watched from afar. One entry, dated July 22, 1922, stood out. Little Eleanor heard the whispers again. She said the keeper wants something buried. He doesn't speak, but she feels it. We have no choice. We must obey. Eleanor. The name echoed in my mind. She wasn't just a distant ancestor, she was the link between the past and the present. Another note mentioned that the family had sealed something in the basement of the old house before they mysteriously disappeared. Was this what Maltrapillo was guarding? Closing the ledger with trembling hands, the weight of realization bore down on me. Everything pointed to a deeper truth. A curse that transcended time and connected every family that had ever lived on this farm. Each seemed to be a pawn in a game I was only beginning to understand. It was as if all the families were destined to feed an ancient, insatiable force. And now I was next in line. The rain had begun to fall, thin, yet relentless. With Emily's notebook and the farm ledger in hand, I returned to the barn. I had to see the basement again. This time, I would delve deeper. The weak beam of the flashlight illuminated the space, but every shadow seemed alive, dancing to the rhythm of my growing fear. When I reached the trapdoor, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it that way. Holding the flashlight in one hand and the rusty knife in the other, I descended the creaking steps. The overwhelming smell of earth and mold hit me again, but something else drew my attention. A metal box, partially buried in the ground. With effort, I pulled the box free and opened it. Inside, I found the items I needed for the ritual: black candles, a small vial of ashes, and a silver blade. But there was something else. A faded photograph. It showed the Holloway family gathered in front of the barn, their faces solemn. In the background, nearly invisible, was a tall, hooded figure. Eleanor's face was blurred, as though something had deliberately erased her from the image. A distant thunderclap rumbled through the night, and the air around me grew colder. Something moved in the shadows of the basement. I wasn't alone anymore. Descending the final steps, the flashlight trembled in my hand. Each step echoed like a warning to turn back, but I couldn't. The smell of mold and earth mingled with something sharper, acrid and unexplainable. When my feet touched the basement floor, the darkness felt alive, pulsing around me. Something was waiting. "I have to keep going," I muttered, trying to suppress the fear clawing at my mind. In the center of the basement, holding the metal box, I scanned my surroundings. The air was heavy, as though on the verge of eruption. Then it happened. A vision, not like a thought or memory, but as if I were truly transported to another time. I saw Eleanor. She was kneeling before a makeshift altar, her trembling hands clutching a small wooden cross. Behind her, a hooded figure loomed like a shadow, its face obscured in darkness. Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, repeating a phrase like a mantra. "He will not take me. I am not his." When the vision ended, my heart was racing. Eleanor had been marked by maltrapillo, but something about her was different. She wasn't what he was looking for. But what did he want? Why did he demand an offering? The answers seemed etched into every detail around me. I kept exploring the basement, and that's when I saw it, carved into the wall. The same symbol from